The wagon rolled into Dry Creek, just as the sun began to sink behind the jagged hills, painting the sky in streaks of amber and crimson. Dust rose in lazy spirals behind the wheels, catching the light like flecks of gold. Annabelle stood at the back of the wagon, one hand gripping the wooden rail, the other steadying the crate that carried her paints and canvases. She had followed the horizon for years, chasing landscapes before railroads and settlements swallowed them whole. Dry Creek was her newest stop, small, weathered, and balanced on the edge of change. The town was quiet, in the way frontier towns often were. Cautious, a blacksmith hammered iron near the main street. A pair of ranchers leaned against the saloon porch. Children paused mid-game to stare at the unfamiliar sight of a woman traveling alone with art supplies instead of cattle or cargo. Annabelle stepped down from the wagon and inhaled deeply. The air smelled of dry grass, smoke, and distant rain. Beyond the town stretched a valley, untouched by fences, rolling hills, a narrow river glinting in fading light, and mountains resting like silent guardians in the distance. It was exactly what she had come for. Inside the saloon, she asked for lodging and overheard whispers. Railroad surveyors were here last week. Tracks will run straight through that valley. Annabelle's heart tightened. She had arrived just in time. As she left the saloon, she noticed him. He stood slightly apart from the others, near the hitching rail, his hat tipped low. His build was strong but rigid, as though his body resisted movement. A faint stiffness lingered in his right leg. His coat was worn, his boots dusty, but his gaze was sharp, scanning the horizon, as if he were still riding ahead of a wagon train. Robert. She didn't know his name yet, but she felt his presence. Annabelle carried her easel beyond the last building, setting it up where the valley opened wide before her. She worked quickly, capturing the way the sun melted into the earth. Her brush moved with urgency, as if time itself pressed against her back. "You're racing the light," a low voice said behind her. She turned. The man from town stood a few feet away, arms crossed. "I always am," she replied calmly. He studied the canvas. "You missed the darker patch near the ridge." Annabelle followed his gesture. He was right. The land dipped into shadow where storm clouds had recently passed. "You know the terrain well," she said, adding the shadow with deliberate strokes. "Used to," he answered. "I was a scout before I got slow." His tone was flat, but something beneath it carried loss. "Land doesn't forget the ones who walked it," Annabelle said gently. He gave a quiet huff. "Land doesn't remember either. It does if someone paints it." That caught his attention. She worked in silence for several moments, aware of his gaze, not intrusive, just curious. The wind lifted her hair, and instinctively he stepped forward to steady the easel before it tipped. Their hands brushed. The contact was brief, but something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Two people shaped by the same rugged land in different ways. "You plan to stay long?" he asked. "Long enough to finish what I came for, and that is to preserve this valley before the railroad cuts through it." His jaw tightened. "Steel doesn't ask permission." "No," she agreed. "But memory doesn't either." For the first time, his guarded expression softened slightly. "The name's Robert," he said. "Annabelle." The sun slipped fully behind the mountains, leaving the sky glowing faintly. Robert glanced at the horizon, then back at her canvas. "If you want the best view of the valley, there's a ridge east of here. Most folks don't know the trail." "Will you show me?" she asked. Without hesitation, he hesitated, as if agreeing meant stepping back into a world he'd tried to leave behind. Finally, he nodded. "Tomorrow." And, as darkness settled over Dry Creek, Annabelle realized she hadn't just found a new landscape to paint. She had found a guide. Morning came pale and quiet over Dry Creek. A thin veil of mist clung to the valley floor as the sun climbed slowly above the mountains. Annabelle was already awake, fastening the straps on her paint crate and rolling a fresh canvas into place. She had learned long ago that the best light did not wait for late risers. Robert stood near the edge of town, saddling a bay horse. He moved with practiced efficiency, though the stiffness in his right leg was more noticeable in the cool air. He didn't complain. He never did. "You ride?" he asked, as Annabelle approached. "Well enough," she answered. He studied her boots, her posture measuring risk. The ridge trails narrow. I didn't come west for comfort. That earned the faintest hint of a smile. They rode east, leaving behind the wooden buildings and drifting smoke of Dry Creek. The land widened quickly, stretching into open grasslands, broken only by scattered juniper trees and outcroppings of stone. The sound of hooves against dirt blended with the distant call of hawks overhead. For a while, neither spoke. Annabelle watched everything the way the early light brushed silver across the river. The subtle color shifts in the hills. Robert watched differently. He tracked movement in the brush, wind direction, distant silhouettes. His habits were carved deep. The trail narrowed as they climbed. The incline grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses the final stretch. "You used to scout this path?" Annabelle asked, slightly breathless. "Lead 3 wagon trains through here," Robert replied. "Kept them clear of ambush and flood routes. And now, I fix fences." The words carried no bitterness, but something close to it. They reached the top just as the sun fully broke free of the horizon. The valley opened beneath them, vast and untouched. Golden grass rippled in waves. The river curved like a silver ribbon through the center. Farther west, the mountains cast long shadows that made the land appear endless. Annabelle inhaled sharply. "This," she whispered. She moved quickly, setting up her easel at the edge of the ridge. Robert stepped back, giving her space, though he couldn't stop watching the way her face lit with purpose. For brush began its dance. Swift, deliberate strokes, capturing the broad sweep first, then the smaller details. She worked like someone trying to hold back time itself. "You paint like it might disappear tomorrow," Robert observed. "It might," she said. He lowered himself onto a nearby rock, resting carefully against it. "Railroad men marked the lower valley last week. Stakes are already in." Her hand slowed for a moment, but didn't stop. "Then this painting becomes proof. It was once wild. Proof won't stop them." "No," she admitted. "But it might make people think." Wind swept across the ridge, lifting loose strands of her hair. Robert reached up instinctively to steady the corner of her canvas. "You always this determined?" he asked. "I learned early that waiting for permission means losing what matters." He studied her profile, the focus in her eyes, the steadiness in her hands. "You said you lost someone," he said quietly. "My father," she answered. "He believed the West was more than land. He said it was a story unfolding. When he died, I decided I would paint that story." Robert nodded slowly. "Stories fade. Not if someone remembers them." A long silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. A distant whistle echoed faintly from the west. Both turned toward it. Robert's jaw tightened. "They're surveying again." Annabelle dipped her brush into a darker shade, deepening the ridge lines. "Then we paint faster." He watched her for a long moment, something shifting inside him. For months after his injury, he had felt like a relic, a tool no longer needed. But standing here, guiding her to this place, he felt useful again. "Tomorrow," he said slowly, "there's a canyon south of here. Red rock. Light hits it at dusk, like it's on fire." She glanced back at him, surprised. "You'll show me." He hesitated only briefly this time. "Yes." The wind picked up, sweeping across the valley in a steady breath. Annabelle paused and looked out over the land, imagining iron tracks cutting through the grass. "We can't stop change," she said softly. "No," Robert replied, "but we can decide what survives it." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and realized she wasn't just painting the West. She was reminding him why it mattered. And for the first time since the bullet had ended his scouting days, Robert felt something stir that wasn't regret. It was purpose. By the end of the week, the railroad men had returned. They came with measuring chains, survey flags, and the confidence of men who believed the future belonged solely to them. Stakes appeared across the lower valley like splinters in the earth. Thin red cloth fluttered in the wind, marking the path where steel would soon slice through grass that had never known iron. Annabelle stood on the ridge with her newest canvas, painting faster than ever. Robert watched from horseback below, jaw tight. He had guided her to the Red Canyon the evening before, just as promised. She had captured it in blazing oranges and deep violets as dusk turned stone into fire. But now the urgency had changed. This was no longer just art. It felt like resistance. "They're moving quicker than expected," Robert said, as he climbed up beside her. "I can see that," Annabelle replied, though her tone held steady resolve rather than panic. 2. Railroad officials approached from below, boots crunching against gravel. Their suits were dusty but tailored, a sharp contrast to the worn denim and leather common in Dry Creek. "You the painter," one called up. Annabelle didn't stop brushing color across canvas. "I am. Company owns this land soon enough. Might want to pick another view." Robert stepped slightly closer to her, not aggressive but unmistakably protective. "She's not interfering," he said evenly. The second man smirked. "Not yet." Annabelle finally turned, meeting their gaze without fear. "Does progress require silence?" The first man laughed. "Progress requires tracks. And what happens to what's already here?" she asked. "Gets replaced." They walked off, unconcerned. Robert exhaled slowly. "Men like that don't look back." "Then we must," she answered. That afternoon, Annabelle rode into Dry Creek and nailed a notice outside the general store. "Exhibition, The Valley Before Steel. Tomorrow at sunset." Curiosity spread quickly. Some townsfolk were skeptical, others were intrigued. Few had ever seen their land reflected back at them through an artist's eye. The following evening, Annabelle arranged her canvases along the wide porch of the boarding house. The ridge at dawn, the Red Canyon at dusk, the river under moonlight. Each painting glowed with life, capturing the vastness and quiet strength of the frontier. Robert stood in the shadows at first, arms folded, watching as townspeople gathered. A rancher stepped forward, studying the ridge painting. "Didn't realize it looked like that from above." "It's beautiful," his wife murmured softly. Children pointed at the river scene, recognizing familiar bends and cottonwood trees. Annabelle spoke clearly, her voice steady but heartfelt. "The railroad will bring change, some of it good. But this valley, the way it breathes, the way it stands untouched, deserves to be remembered as it is now. Once steel runs through it, it will never look the same again." By the end of the week, the railroad men had returned. They came with measuring chains, survey flags, and the confidence of men who believed the future belonged solely to them. Stakes appeared across the lower valley like splinters in the earth. Thin red cloth fluttered in the wind, marking the path where steel would soon slice through grass that had never known iron. Annabelle stood on the ridge with her newest canvas, painting faster than ever. Robert watched from horseback below, jaw tight. He had guided her to the Red Canyon the evening before, just as promised. She had captured it in blazing oranges and deep violets as dusk turned stone into fire. But now the urgency had changed. This was no longer just art. It felt like resistance. "They're moving quicker than expected," Robert said, as he climbed up beside her. "I can see that," Annabelle replied, though her tone held steady resolve rather than panic. 2. Railroad officials approached from below, boots crunching against gravel. Their suits were dusty but tailored, a sharp contrast to the worn denim and leather common in Dry Creek. "You the painter," one called up. Annabelle didn't stop brushing color across canvas. "I am. Company owns this land soon enough. Might want to pick another view." Robert stepped slightly closer to her, not aggressive but unmistakably protective. "She's not interfering," he said evenly. The second man smirked. "Not yet." Annabelle finally turned, meeting their gaze without fear. "Does progress require silence?" The first man laughed. "Progress requires tracks. And what happens to what's already here?" she asked. "Gets replaced." They walked off, unconcerned. Robert exhaled slowly. "Men like that don't look back." "Then we must," she answered. That afternoon, Annabelle rode into Dry Creek and nailed a notice outside the general store. "Exhibition, The Valley Before Steel. Tomorrow At sunset, curiosity spread quickly. Some townsfolk were skeptical, others were intrigued. Few had ever seen their land reflected back at them through an artist's eye. The following evening, Annabelle arranged her canvases along the wide porch of the boarding house. The ridge at dawn, the red canyon at dusk, the river under moonlight. Each painting glowed with life, capturing the vastness and quiet strength of the frontier. Robert stood in the shadows at first, arms folded, watching as townspeople gathered. A rancher stepped forward, studying the ridge painting. Didn't realize it looked like that from above. It's beautiful, his wife murmured softly. Children pointed at the river scene, recognizing familiar bends and cottonwood trees. Annabelle spoke clearly, her voice steady but heartfelt. The railroad will bring change, some of it good. But this valley, the way it breathes, the way it stands untouched, deserves to be remembered as it is now. Once steel runs through it, it will never look the same again. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Robert felt something stir in his chest. Pride. For months, he had believed his worth ended when he could no longer ride ahead of danger. But watching Annabelle stand tall before the town, fighting not with weapons, but with color and courage, reminded him that strength wore many forms. After the crowd dispersed, a few ranchers lingered. They could shift the line east, one said quietly. Would cost more, but not impossible. Not if enough of us ask. Another agreed. Hope, fragile but real, began to take root. When the porch finally emptied, Annabelle sagged slightly with exhaustion. Robert stepped forward, steadying her shoulders. You did more than paint tonight, he said. She searched his face. Was it enough? It started something. She looked back at her canvases, glowing under lantern light. I don't want to fight progress, Robert. I just don't want the land erased. He nodded slowly. Then we won't let it be. A faint glow appeared on the western horizon. Not sunset this time, but smoke. Robert's posture stiffened instantly. That's near the survey camp, he muttered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of burning grass. Annabelle's breath caught fire. He grabbed his hat. Dry season and careless sparks don't mix. Without hesitation, she began gathering water buckets. Annabelle, I'm not staying behind. He met her determined gaze and understood. This wasn't just her subject anymore. It was their fight. As flames flickered brighter in the distance, Robert mounted his horse, offering her a hand up. The valley they were trying to preserve was burning, and neither of them intended to let it fall without a fight. The flames moved fast. By the time Robert and Annabelle reached the lower valley, the fire had already swallowed a stretch of dry grass near the survey stakes. Orange tongues of heat snapped and hissed as wind drove them forward. Smoke rolled thick across the land, turning the sky a bruised shade of gray. Railroad workers shouted in confusion, scrambling to beat back flames with coats and shovels. One overturned lantern lay half buried in dirt. The careless spark that had likely started it all. Robert swung down from his horse before it had fully stopped. Instinct took over. He grabbed a shovel from a startled worker and began carving a firebreak in the soil, digging fast and deep to halt the spreading edge. Water, someone yelled. Annabelle was already moving. She hauled a bucket from the supply wagon, her skirts darkening with soot as she ran toward the flames. She didn't think about danger. She thought about the ridge she had painted first, the golden grass that had shimmered under morning light. She would not watch it burn without trying. The heat pressed against her face, sharp and relentless. She threw water along the advancing line, then ran back for more. Smoke stung her eyes, but she kept moving. Robert glanced toward her, heart hammering. Stay back from the wind shift, he called. I'm fine, she answered, though her voice strained. A sudden gust roared across the valley, and the flames surged sideways. Annabelle, the fire leaped toward her position, fast and vicious. For a single, terrifying moment, she stood frozen, as heat rushed forward like a living thing. Robert didn't think. Ignoring the sharp protest in his injured leg, he sprinted across the uneven ground. Pain shot upward with every step, but he didn't slow. He grabbed her arm and pulled her hard toward the freshly dug trench. They stumbled together, rolling into the dirt as fire raced past the edge of the break. Smoke engulfed them. For a few seconds, the world was nothing but heat and ash. Then, gradually, the flames lost momentum. The firebreak held. Workers smothered the remaining embers with dirt and soaked blankets. The roar faded into crackling whispers. Silence followed. Robert lay on his back, chest heaving. Annabelle was beside him, coughing but unhurt. "You could have been killed," he rasped. "So could you," she shot back, pushing herself upright. Her hands trembled as she brushed soot from his shoulder. Only then did she notice the way he winced, clutching his leg. "You're hurt?" "I've been hurt," he said stubbornly. She shook her head. "You ran for you." The words landed heavier than the smoke. Annabelle's composure cracked. Tears mixed with soot along her cheeks. "I can't lose this land," she whispered. "And I can't lose you either." Robert looked at her, really looked at her, and the guarded walls he had kept standing for months finally fell. "You won't," he said softly. "Not if I have any say." The fire had scorched a wide strip of grass, but beyond the blackened earth, the valley still stretched intact. The ridge stood firm. The river still glinted beneath smoke-streaked light. Annabelle followed his gaze. "It survived," she breathed. "So did we." Carefully, he reached for her hand. This time, there was no hesitation, no accidental brushing of fingers. She held on tightly, grounding him as much as he steadied her. Behind them, a few townsfolk began arriving, having seen the smoke from Dry Creek. They joined in dousing the last embers. Even the railroad men worked without argument now, faces grim. "One," rancher muttered. "Tracks won't mean much if the land's ash." Robert exchanged a glance with Annabelle. The fire had done more than burn grass. It had revealed how fragile everything truly was. As dusk approached, the sky cleared slowly, streaked in smoky pink and fading gold. Annabelle stood and walked a short distance away, studying the blackened strip cutting through the valley. She memorized it. Tomorrow, she would paint it too, not just the beauty, but the cost. Robert joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. "You still think memory matters?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Now more than ever." He turned to her, brushing soot from her cheek with gentle fingers. Then, without another word, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or desperate, just certain. Behind them, the valley smoldered softly, wounded but alive. And, in that fragile stillness, something stronger than steel began to take root between them. The valley looked different after the fire. A dark scar stretched across the lower grasslands, a jagged reminder of how quickly beauty could vanish. Yet beyond it, the land still breathed. The river continued its steady curve. The ridge remained proud against the horizon. Even the scorched earth carried a stubborn kind of resilience. Thin green shoots, already pushing through blackened soil. Annabelle stood before her newest canvas, brush poised. She had painted the valley at dawn, at dusk, beneath moonlight and storm clouds. Now she painted it marked by flame. Robert leaned against the hitching post near her easel, hat tipped low, watching in quiet admiration. His legs still ached from that reckless run through smoke, but he no longer felt broken by it. For the first time since the bullet had forced him from scouting, he felt necessary again. "You're painting the damage," he observed. "I'm painting the truth," she replied. The canvas showed the contrast. Golden hills untouched beside charred earth, smoke lingering in the distance. The sky vast and forgiving above it all. Robert stepped closer. "People might not want to remember the fire." "They should," Annabelle said softly, "because it shows what nearly disappeared." Word of the fire, and the exhibition had spread beyond Dry Creek. More townsfolk gathered that afternoon than ever before. Ranchers, shopkeepers even. A few railroad workers stood at the edge of the crowd, uneasy but curious. Annabelle arranged her paintings in a long row. The ridge before the fire, the canyon at sunset, the river under stars, and finally the valley scarred but standing. She faced the crowd. "The railroad will still come," she began calmly. "Tracks will be laid, trains will pass through. That cannot be stopped." A murmur passed through the group. But what this valley is, what it has been, does not have to be erased. She gestured toward the final canvas. The fire reminded us how fragile this land is. Steel and progress will change it. But we can choose how much we protect. We can ask for the line to bend where it can. We can preserve the ridge, the riverbanks, the canyon trails. Robert watched the faces around her. He saw something shift, not rebellion, not anger, but reflection. One rancher stepped forward. If enough of us petition the company, they might reroute east of the ridge. It'd cost them, another said. Not as much as another fire, someone muttered. The railroad foreman, standing near the back, cleared his throat. Company doesn't want bad press or burned camps. If the town proposes a reasonable adjustment, I'll carry it west. Volt, real and solid, filled the air. Annabelle's heart pounded. She hadn't expected immediate change. She had only hoped to stir thought. Robert stepped beside her, his presence steady and grounding. You gave them something worth saving, he said quietly. She glanced up at him. You showed me where to look. The crowd gradually dispersed, conversations buzzing with new determination. Plans began forming, meetings, letters, compromises. The West would still change, but perhaps not carelessly. As the sun began its slow descent, Annabelle and Robert walked toward the ridge, the same place where it had all begun. The grass whispered under their boots. The sky stretched endlessly above them. When they reached the top, Annabelle set down her sketchbook, but did not open it. Instead, she simply looked. The valley glowed in evening light. The scar from the fire was visible, but smaller now, softened by distance and resilience. Survey stakes still stood, but some had already been pulled by uncertain hands. It won't ever be exactly the same, Robert said. No, she agreed. But nothing truly stays still. He turned to her. Will you keep traveling? She considered the question carefully. Will, she said. There are other valleys, other stories. His expression flickered, just briefly. But, she continued, stepping closer, I've learned something.
What's that?
Preserving the West isn't just about painting land. He raised an eyebrow. It's about the people who love it. She slipped her hand into his. Then maybe I'll guide you a while longer, he said softly. She smiled. I was hoping you would. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the ridge, the same light that had first brought them together. Annabelle memorized it, not with urgency this time, but with gratitude. The West would endure in fragments, in preserved ridges, rerouted tracks, and painted canvases carried from town to town, and in the quiet strength of a wounded scout who had found purpose again, and in the traveling painter who refused to let memory fade. As twilight settled over the valley, Annabelle rested her head against Robert's shoulder. The land remained, the story continued, and somewhere beyond the hills, a train whistle sounded. Not as a threat this time, but as part of a changing world they would face together. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.